I tried to do this rant once before. I tried to rope in the indigenous as well, as I often see the same sort of ethno-cultural separatist sentiments with them. But I was having trouble actually articulating what the problem was, because, of course, it ultimately came down to a fundamental disconnect in moral values between myself and the people who believe in the cultural preservation of Quebec or of indigenous cultures. That being that I believe these things are arbitrary, because they are, we made them up, and to therefore insist that others recognize them as distinct, special, and privileged, especially legally, is not just a violation of the individual rights of anyone who lives under the legal jurisdiction of people who enforce such things, such as, say, an Anglophone in Quebec, but is fundamentally unfair regardless. That is why I roped the indigenous in as well, as while their special statuses wouldn't actually affect me, as they don't control the land I live on, it is nevertheless unfair for them to be treated differently by the government because of their ancestry. Conferring such things at all, but especially based on things you can't control, like ancestry, violates the golden rule, because it presumes some people do inherently deserve to be treated differently than others, based not on any merit or demerit of their actions, but on arbitrary or involuntary things like ancestry or cultural practice that do not, therefore, confer any credit on the person in question, since the outcome is not of their own making. Of course, these people believe the exact opposite. Their speaking French, or having Cree ancestors, or what have you, means they do deserve different, and implicitly, preferential treatment, because they're emotionally attached to these arbitrary or involuntary things, and cannot stand seeing others being free to make choices that degrade the influence of these things that they've come to identify with. Now I see this as a you problem, i.e., deal with it, because people are free to do what they want, but they're hell-bent on making it the problem of everyone who doesn't coddle their identity. And Quebec has already succeeded. Right? Hence why everything that isn't personal communication in Canada is written in both French and English, despite almost no one outside of Quebec speaking it, and despite it being very unfair and preferential treatment compared to all the other minorities' languages people also speak. For some reason, French gets to be special. The indigenous have not managed this, namely because they're at the mercy of the federal government, who, at the best of times, neglect them almost entirely, making their separate status a negative, as of course was the intention of the Indian Act. However, should the cultural zeitgeist change sufficiently to stop the abuse of indigenous people by the feds, I could very well see the opposite occurring, and indigenous people becoming like Quebec-like in insisting on special privilege and status based on their ethnicity, which, despite being an inherently racist concept, would ironically, I guarantee you, be fully supported by the Canadian left, since the left is notorious for only caring about racism in terms of power dynamics, i.e. its ability to entrench the power of dominant groups, not racism in principle.